The incredible life of the prophet David, who fearlessly confronted the giant ruler Goliath. David's interesting life began when he was a young boy. From the Ark of the Covenant carried by angels to the waters of the mysterious river, there are so many details you need to hear in this story, where mountains and stones speak and animals begin to speak. Let's start with the amazing journey of the prophet David, the father of Solomon, one of the most powerful kings in the world. About 3,000 years ago, in Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem, the birthplace of Jesus, a child was born. One of Jesse's 13 sons, he was none other than David. David, which in Hebrew means the most beloved, the apple of the eye, was indeed, as his name means, different from the rest of the children in the family, because his father David had sensed something different about him when he was still a child. David was born into a poor family of shepherds, and his childhood was surrounded by animals and nature. One of David's remarkable characteristics was his voice. God had given David such a voice that birds and other animals would gather around him when they heard his voice. Even the mountains and the stones would join him with their voices when he was glorifying God. They would chant God with him. God says in the Bible, "We gave the mountains at his command, and they glorified their Creator morning and evening, and we gave the birds at his command, and they all followed God." Another miraculous attribute given to David by God was his ability to bend and melt iron. This ability, which no one else had, enabled David to shape iron into the shape he wanted, and he would later be able to make many different weapons. And now we come to one of the most remarkable events of David's life on his way to becoming first king of his country and then a prophet. It was a great moment in David's young life. He would have an important battle that would lead to him being recognized by everyone and eventually even becoming king. He faced off against the giant warrior Goliath, and it was one of the most memorable events in history. It all begins with Goliath, the ruler of a tribe located between Egypt and Damascus, who became the scourge of the Israelites. The most striking detail about this ruler is his appearance. Ancient sources describe him as a giant ruler. While many researchers today bring up interesting clues that giants lived in the past, whether Goliath was one of these giants is a matter of debate. The general consensus is that he was about 3 meters tall. This warrior ruler, who made a name for himself by his huge size, disliked the Israelites and plundered their cities. He captured their women and children and smuggled them back to his own country and defeated the Israelites and made them miserable. But Goliath didn't stop there. He finally took the sacred Ark of the Covenant from the Israelites, and to make them even madder, he desecrated the priceless Ark of the Covenant. When the Israelites heard this, they were very angry. The Jews, who were skeptical of Saul because he was not a descendant of a ruler at that time, said, "Let Saul prove himself to us, and let us be convinced that he is capable of leadership." They asked Saul to take back the Ark of the Covenant from this giant ruler. So the angels took the Ark of the Covenant from Goliath's hand and carried it and placed it at Saul's door. When the Ark of the Covenant suddenly appeared on Saul's doorstep, the Israelites accepted Saul as their leader and set out with an army of 80,000 men under his leadership. Because now the Jews had the Ark. It had miraculously come back to them. God's help would be with them, and they would rebel against Goliath's rule and get rid of this evil ruler. With the Ark, they were in a very high state of morale. They set their sights on the land where Goliath's people lived. Under the leadership of Saul, they planned to fight against the giant Goliath and take back their prisoners, their women and children, and their valuables. But the army was not yet aware of the unimaginable thing that would happen to them on this journey. On their way to fight Goliath, they came across a river on the way. God was going to test them with this river. When they reached it, they were warned that no one should drink from it, and that those who were too thirsty to endure should be content with a handful of water. This had already been told to the Israelites by a prophet. So Saul warned his whole army, and reminded everyone of what he had heard about the river. But most of the 80,000 men of the Israelite army ignored this divine message from their leader Saul. Only about 4,000 of them did not touch the water in the river, while most of the rest of the army drank from the river as if they had not been warned. This water, as promised, soon left them in such a state that they didn't even have the energy to walk. They got sick and fell down on the ground. These soldiers were immediately taken out of the army. When there were only about 4,000 left, Saul and the rest of the army became nervous, and most of them gave up fighting and ran away, leaving only 313 soldiers. They had to continue the journey with these 313 soldiers. Now we come to the most exciting part of it all. David was one of the 313 men left of this army of 80,000 men. He was young, not yet a prophet, not yet a ruler. He had come into the army as a shepherd soldier, but even he had not yet discovered his soldiering skills. David, who had heard the mountains and stones chanting with him over and over again, was on his way with the rest of the army towards the giant Goliath when another strange thing happened to him. He heard a whisper and looked in the direction of the sound, but no one was there. Then he realized that the sound was coming from 3 small stones lying on the ground just ahead of him. The stones were talking to him, and they said to David, "Take us with you. You will kill Goliath using us." David was amazed at this wonderful miracle, and he put them in his bag and went on his way. At that time there were slingshots that threw stones. It had the same effect as a bullet from a gun today. When the giant Goliath saw the Israelites with a tiny army in front of him, he could not hold back his laughter. He said, "Did you come to me by chance?" The dusty, tense atmosphere of the battlefield echoed with the breathing of thousands of soldiers. With a booming voice, he challenged the Israelites. "Who among you will stand against me?" he called out. According to the tradition of the time, Goliath asked for an opponent to fight him before the battle. No one had the courage to stand up to this giant of a warrior. Then a humble young man, dressed in ordinary clothes, so small in comparison to this giant of a man, walked out into the square. Yes, it was David. Instead of the armor or the sword that an ordinary warrior would carry, he had only a slingshot and 3 stones in his pocket. With a gleam of faith in his eyes, a look of courage on his face, and a small body, David stood there, and the giant Goliath laughed out loud. Then David carefully picked up the stones in his palms. Calmly, as if born for the moment, he readied his slingshot. Then he fixed his eyes on Goliath's forehead. David eventually pulled his slingshot. A whistling sound in the air, then a hard crash, and then the noise of a huge body falling to the ground. And he hit Goliath right in the center of the forehead with a stone. The giant Goliath is sprawled on the ground with the stone in the center of his forehead. David rushed to his side, took his own sword from deep within, and ended his life. The shouts of joy of the Israelites filled the sky. His soldiers were frightened as the giant of a man fell to the ground. God put courage in the hearts of the Jews, and suddenly the battle became fierce, and the Jews won the battle. After the victory, all the spoils were burned, because that was the ruling in the Torah at the time. The story of David teaches us the power of faith, courage, and humility, that these values are the real weapons that can defeat the giant in man. After this war in which David killed Goliath and gained victory, the ruler Saul gave his daughter in marriage to David. Young David gained great popularity among the people after defeating Goliath. After this victory, David became an important member of Saul's army. After a while, however, Saul became jealous and resentful of David's popularity and success and tried to kill him, but failed. He was then forced to escape David's anger and lived in exile for a long time, during which time David's faith and courage kept him alive and strengthened him to become the leader of his people. Years later, when Saul died, the Israelites chose David as their new leader. David was now the new king of the Israelites. David's reign, followed by his prophecy, was a golden age for the Israelites. He conquers Jerusalem, makes it the capital of a united Israel, and brings the Ark of the Covenant to the city. David was cementing his relations with various political and national groups through marriage. David desires to build a temple to Yahweh, but is denied because of the bloodshed in his reign. During the time of David, there were also some incredible and extraordinary events. We are about to tell the story of some of the leaders of the tribe that God turned into monkeys. If you subscribe to our channel, you will not miss such videos. The Psalms were revealed to Prophet David. The Psalms are a collection of advice and prayers. Some of the chants sung in churches today are said to come from the Psalms. David also followed the Torah revealed to Moses. David made various weapons and armor, which gave his army the upper hand in battle. It is said in the sources that David should be seen as the master of the industrial revolution of mankind. He showed mankind how to work iron for the first time. After David became ruler, he would often go among the people in disguise, asking them if they were satisfied with his rule, and yet all the people were satisfied with him. God had given him the ability to judge rightly, and also the gift of eloquence. He also had an extraordinarily beautiful voice, the most beautiful voice of any human being. He was intuitive, far-sighted, accurate in his judgments, and his face was as beautiful as his words. But in the middle of all this dominance, he was not arrogant, he was very humble. David used to divide his time into 4 parts. The first part was for worship, the second part was for settling legal disputes, and the third part was for preaching and advising the people. In the 4th time, he did his personal business. David also practiced worship very well as a prophet. Today, there is a fast known as the Davidic fast. It is a hard fast, 1 day at a time. David practiced this fast. He would eat 1 day and fast another day. David slept for 1/3 of the night. Just think of it as 4 hours. And the rest of the time he spent in worship. And God tested David one day when he was in that time of worship. Normally nobody would come, and nobody would dare to come. One day, 2 men jumped over the walls of David's house and came to David. David was surprised to see them. They said, "Judge between us. We have a problem and only you can solve it." When David asked, one of them started telling, "I have 1 sheep. This friend of mine has 99 sheep. He pressured me to take my 1 sheep. He offered me something and he beat me to it, and then he confiscated my 1 sheep." David suddenly became angry and said, "Partnerships are usually like that. A person oppresses, but not a person who believes in Allah and fears Allah and does righteous deeds." He said, "Keep your sheep." Those 2 people suddenly started laughing, and they turned and went away. And very soon he realized that it was a test of God. Those people were angels sent by God. And he should have listened to the other side. Sometimes we listen to one person, and we immediately think that he is right. And we immediately get angry with the other person. We execute him extrajudicially. It is a human emotion. It happened to the prophet David. The Ark of the Covenant, which contained the 10 Commandments from the Torah, held some of the holy relics. It was passed down from Adam to Seth to Moses, and whenever the Israelites had this ark with them, the armies would have a great morale boost, and they would fight and win. It was very popular and respected among the people that day. They saw it as a divine relic that gave strength to the Israelites, and they believed it had a spiritual impact. Today it is said that there is a serious intelligence war about the location of that ark, that it is a sign of spiritual superiority, and that God helps the one who has it. Recently, according to news reports, the ark has been found and opened. This will be the subject of our next video. Subscribe to our channel and don't miss this video. The prophet David had this ark. It contains special divine relics, and it is believed by the Jews that he strengthened his kingdom through this ark. David's marriage produced many children, And just as he had a special place among his brothers and sisters as a child, so now he had a special child among his children. He was none other than Solomon. His video is also available on our channel. Be sure to watch it. In the days of the prophet David, the Jews were forbidden to hunt on Saturday. They were not allowed to engage in trade. They were only supposed to engage in worship. Sometimes fish filled the streams on those days as a test from God, and some of the believers were always ambitious about it. Finally, Satan gave them a temptation. When the devil said, "You are forbidden to eat, but not to fish," they succumbed to their greed, and some of them started casting their nets on Saturday and pulling them out on Sunday morning. Because God's wisdom was that only on Saturday the fish would attack like this. Eventually, the Jews were divided into 3 different groups: those who did this ugly work and tried to deceive the prophet and God. The second group were those who did not do it, but remained silent and did not in any way try to convince others of their wrongdoing. The third group were those who did not do this ugly deed and warned and advised others, and they would condemn and warn those who remained silent. Then these righteous believers parted ways and distanced themselves from those who did those ugly deeds. After a while they could not see them, and when they went to see them out of curiosity, they found that the Jews who had stayed on that side had all been turned into monkeys. Many more mysterious events like this happened in the time of King David. After reigning for 40 years, when he was 100 years old, David, who was both a prophet and a king, entered his house one day and saw a strange man standing in front of him. When he asked, "Who are you?" he realized that his life on this earth had come to an end, because the stranger in his room answered, "I am Azrael, Grim Reaper, Angel of Death." Then David said to Azrael, "Do God's command." Yes, David also showed a manifestation of the truth that every created thing will taste death. He dies at age 100 and chooses Solomon, his youngest son, as his successor instead of his eldest son Adonijah.